Right. So now into section 9.1. 9.1 is about the null and the alternate hypotheses. Let's see here. So let me kind of give you some idea of what the null and alternate hypotheses are. And sorry, let me maybe give an example. So if we look at maybe the act of stealing something, right? If we look at the act of stealing something, you could say that stealing can be good and stealing can be bad, okay, on one end of the spectrum or on the other end of the spectrum. And, if if a person working in a company, steals, hundreds of millions of dollars from the company and they end up bankrupting the company, and that puts hundreds or thousands of employees out of work and maybe takes away eliminates their retirement accounts as a result, we'd say, yeah, stealing in this case, that's really, really bad, right? That's way over here on this spectrum. And then, you might have another person, maybe who steals food because they're starving or their family is starving. Okay, so they're just desperate. Um, so you might not label that as being completely bad. That may be in some kind of gray area between good and bad. And then you have the classic example of Robin Hood, right? Who steals from the rich, but gives to the poor. So stealing, the process of stealing is, still bad, but, you'd maybe rate this closer to good, right? It's this kind of stealing isn't as maybe bad as that, you know, um, and maybe it's a little bit better than that. So there's like all this gray area when we think of good and bad. Um, so with hypothesis testing kind of eliminates this gray area. Okay, this gray area. It doesn't separate it necessarily between good or bad, but it's either you're going to reject a claim or you're going to fail to reject the claim. It's going to be a binary choice. There isn't going to be gray area in the middle. It's going to be either or. Okay. So either you're going to be rejecting the claim in the hypothesis test, or you're going to fail to reject the claim. There won't be anything in between. It's either or. And so the way that I kind of look at it is, kind of like flipping a coin. It's either going to come up heads or it's going to come up tails. It's not going to be anything in between. And so you've got two hypotheses. Okay. You have what's called a null hypothesis, and that's usually labeled with an H and a 0 as a subscript. And then there's the alternate hypothesis, which is usually a capital H with either a subscript A or a subscript 1. Okay. And so when you're conducting a hypothesis test, you're either going to reject the null hypothesis or you're going to fail to reject the null hypothesis. Okay. When you set up a hypothesis test, you're setting up like a binary condition, and one binary condition is the null hypothesis and the other is the alternate hypothesis. Um, so if your null hypothesis kind of lands side up, then the hypothesis test result is going to be fail to reject the null. If the alternate hypothesis that you set up lands side up, then the hypothesis test result is going to be to reject the null. So the hypothesis test process is a tried and true procedure, which is amazing when you think about it. Even given incomplete sample evidence and the randomness uncertainty of real life, a researcher can come to a definitive conclusion and make a decisive decision. There's still uncertainty, but the uncertainty is manageable. So this chapter is a simple introduction to the hypothesis test process. Later chapters follow the same hypothesis test process and make small tweaks within the process given the type of problem being solved. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll define the null hypothesis here, but I wanted to show you that these two hypotheses are just two sides of the same coin, but they are binary choices that we're setting up. No gray area in between. That's kind of the message I want to get across here. Okay, let me know if you have any questions.